Right, good morning, folks. I think we will get the webinar underway. Yeah, very good morning. I'd like to welcome you to the latest instalment of this RSGB Analyst Network webinar series, where today we'll be talking all things biker down and motorcycle safety, and we'll be specifically focusing on the biker down evaluation in Devon and Cornwall, which ran between 2023 and 2025. For today's webinar, I'm joined by Annabelle Priest, so the Devon and Somerset Fire Rescue Service Road Safety Lead. Some of you may know Annabelle as well as the NFCC Young Driver Thematic Lead. And I'm also joined today by Tony Haywood and Andy Nichols from the main project team. And Andy and Tony have been very much at the forefront of delivery of the Biker Down scheme in the Southwest. And so we are very much looking forward to talking through the results of the evaluation with you today, but also talking about the implications more broadly for motorcycle safety and post-collision response. Before we get started, just a bit of housekeeping. We very much encourage questions and observations in the chat, but appreciate there's a lot of interest in this area of road safety and delivery. So please try to keep the chat on topic as we move through, and myself and the team will very much look to pick up a couple of questions towards the end of the webinar today. So firstly, just running through the webinar outline. Before we get on to the main biker down evaluation and the results, I'm going to briefly set the scene in terms of the context, thinking a little bit about motorcycle safety evaluation and the post-collision response angle. And then we'll move on to the main event, which is the methods and the results. And then where we're hoping to land up for today's webinar is that we will open up the discussion towards the end to have a bit of a chat about the results of the evaluation and what this means for delivery. And I think reflecting on that with the project team. The main evaluation report is now available, so do not worry about memorizing either specific snippets of information or specific pieces of information. The report is now available via Agilicis, and it will be elsewhere. Firstly then, thinking about motorcycle safety evaluation more broadly. Reviews of post-license motorcycle safety have found that many measures are effective when we think about those that are given to motorcyclists post-test, and that includes things such as interventions aimed at helmet wearing, protective clothing, and also penalties for drink and drug driving, as well as speed offences. But of course, this is very context specific, and we know that internationally, safety issues around helmet wearing, the picture looks very different when you look at different contexts. Next, we also know from some more domestic research about motorcycle safety that advanced riders, so riders with very significant amounts of experience, tend to be more receptive to post-license training, more so than novice riders and slightly more experienced riders. But significantly know from some work that Professor David Crundle has done, for example, that the difference between the abilities of advanced riders versus novice and experienced riders is not necessarily as huge as we might think when we think about things such as hazard perception. Secondly, today we'll be talking about all things motorcycle safety evaluation. The broader landscape does remain somewhat limited, despite a really positive focus on some of the things that we'll be talking about today. So things like those higher order skills that help motorcyclists think about the how and the why, and not just the what. So behaviour change interventions related to things such as motivations, self-evaluation, awareness, but also situational anticipation and coping strategies are all things that we know do have positive effects when we think about the evidence base more broadly. Lastly, we know that as with many different cohorts within the road safety space, that particularly when we have an element of skills-based training, that we do have to be very careful of things such as overconfidence and overestimation that can stem from such training, and that they can lead to negative behaviour, with fear-based appeal likely to be counterproductive, particularly when we're thinking when those are aimed at a predominantly male audience. Recent research in road safety, particularly around some of the great work from Dr. Elizabeth Box and others, has shown that empowering, trauma-informed approaches do have a powerful effect when we're thinking about the young rider and also the young driver cohort. And broader best practice from behavioural science tells us that interventions that focus on habit formation and increasing access to desired behaviour are likewise very impactful. Biker Down is quite a unique intervention in that it straddles not just road user capabilities and competency, but it also really connects to the post-collision response space as well. And we know that the first few minutes after a crash has occurred, that those are critical. So bystanders, road users, and emergency services all play a vital role together in recognising life-changing injuries and ensuring that appropriate emergency responses to mitigate against deterioration or unintentional levels of harm are important. And you can see on the screen there a visual taken from some really important work taken from the Impact Centre, spearheaded by Professor Tim Nutbeam, based at Devon Air Ambulance, and the Impact Centre, so the Centre for Post-Collision Research, Innovation and Translation, have directly contributed to and are leading on efforts at the moment to help the sector understand what clear guidance and research looks like for bystanders on what to do in post-collision response scenarios. And we know, for example, that the role of bystanders in calling for assistance, recognising injuries, supporting triage where appropriate, and providing intervention in a safe manner are all really important. And so I think we're very kind of pleased today to be talking to you about an evaluation that very much sits within the post-collision response space. Next, before we move on to the results, I'd just like to talk you through a bit of the project background. So I know that Biker Down is, of course, a national programme that is delivered by many teams, over 40 different teams nationally. And before we get on to the evaluations, the intervention specifically in Devon and Cornwall, a huge shout out for the team for Jim Sanderson and Claire Harris and the team at Kent for their ongoing coordination and governance of the broader Biker Down remit. So specifically, the evaluation that we'll be talking about today, it was a multi-year evaluation covering Devon and Cornwall, and it was commissioned through the Vision Zero Southwest Partnership, and it involved colleagues from Devon and Somerset Fire Rescue Service and Cornwall Council as well. And the real aim of the evaluation was to understand regional delivery and effectiveness of Biker Down in Devon and Cornwall, but also specifically to inform future delivery and assess effectiveness for Biker Down to support the wider sector as well, given that we know this is an intervention that's used very widely. And so this evaluation, as I say, was very much commissioned with a view to understand the positives, the negatives, improve delivery moving forward, but also help the sector to grapple with ensuring that Biker Down continues to be an important resource and one that's evidence-led for the community. In terms of the, so obviously many of you are aware of what I'm sure are aware of the basic premise of Biker Down, but for those of you who might be joining without prior knowledge, Biker Down as an intervention is all about equipping motorcyclists with core competencies around managing the scene of a collision involving fellow injured motorcyclists, which also includes administering first aid to injured motorcyclists and also increasing their own visibility whilst out riding. And again, as I mentioned earlier, Biker Down is fairly unique in that it straddles both road user behaviour and the post-collision response space. So Agilisis worked with the Biker Down project management team to kind of set up the evaluation design. And what we wanted to do with this evaluation was very much to assess the extent to which Biker Down was able to equip attendee motorcyclists to competently manage the scene of a collision involving other motorcyclists and to increase their conspicuity whilst out riding. In terms of the evaluation methods, we utilised a pre versus post survey design comparing differences in results before and after attendee participation. And given that this was a multi-year evaluation, this gave us the chance to really delve into not just the quantitative changes pre versus post, but also to reflect on the qualitative side or the free text side of people's experience with Biker Down in the Southwest. So we did a mixture of survey analysis, thematic analysis, but also some stats testing and postcode analysis, which we'll talk about at the end, which allowed us to think about the types of people who are attending this course in the Southwest. And so in terms of the main evaluation design parameters, we had a pre and post survey. The pre-survey enabled us to think about levels of training and prior experience, but also people's motivations for booking a course in the first instance. The post-survey really enabled us to reflect on personal reflections after attendance, but also the general perceived impact that participants felt that Biker Down had on them. And crucially, we issued the post-survey at a minimum of 4 weeks after attendance, and this really enabled us to kind of have a robust approach to assessing behaviour change impact over the long term. Next, getting into some of the results. So the structure for this next part of the presentation today, I'll be going through just some of the basic pre-survey highlights, followed by some of the post-survey highlights, and then some of the supplementary analysis that we've done. But as I mentioned earlier, the report is now out there, and would very much encourage you to engage with the evaluation report after this session today. So in the post survey, it was very, in terms of the demographics of those who filled out the pre-survey, we can see that it was very much the 45 plus cohort and the predominantly male cohort who were attending Biker Down. And again, that's something to bear in mind when we think about some of the motivations and who Biker Down is currently targeting, and who it is reaching in terms of outreach, but then who we might also want to open the intervention up moving forwards. Secondly, we also, the pre-survey was a chance to ask respondents about their pre-existing levels of training, but also accreditation. And for me, some of the real highlights and some of the more important things to kind of note here are that prior to attending Biker Down, almost 2/3 of respondents said that they had not completed any form of first aid training within the last 5 years, which just very much suggests that administering first aid in this context at the scene of a collision involving a fellow motorcyclist is a core competency that motorcyclists felt that they wanted to acquire prior to attending. And as you can see also on the screen there was a real mix of respondents in terms of differing levels of pre versus post levels of test accreditation, but as I say, very low levels of self-reported first aid training. In terms of rider experience, it was really quite significant here that that many respondents said that they had over well in excess of 16 years or more direct riding experience. And again, almost the same number said that they had less than five, that they had between 1 and 5 years experience. And so in terms of the type of people who were attending Bike Down over the past couple of years in the Southwest, it was very much the older, more experienced motorcyclists who often said that they had recently returned from riding after a break and who booked themselves onto a Bike Down course very much as a refresher. Some other interesting insights from the pre-survey were very much about the fact that in terms of journey purpose, overwhelmingly respondents stated that they rode for mainly social occasions and for pleasure, and not necessarily for work purposes or for education, which I think very much reflects the demographic of the people who make up the bulk of those who were involved in the Bike Down evaluation in Devon and Cornwall. And as I touched upon earlier, the motorcycle cohort, as we know, is a very diverse group, and so we're very and as we know from previous research, particularly thinking about the work of the National Young Rider Forum, that this is a very diverse road user group. You know, ranging from all the way from safety conscious youngsters to those who are maybe more at risk, who work in the gig economy, right through to older, larger biker commuters, and those who are riding the more powerful machines. So again, really interesting there to delve into the types of people who were attending Biker Down over the past couple of years. Next, I'd like to reflect on the main quantitative results from the Biker Down evaluation. So overwhelmingly, you can see on the screen there that in terms of specific module effectiveness, that the majority of respondents felt that for each of the modules, so for scene management, administering first aid, and motorcyclist visibility, that the modules were either extremely effective or very effective in terms of teaching them about the content. And from some of the free text comments that we'll come on to later, some of the things that participants honed in on was around key learnings, so specifically around helmet removal, controlling the scene of a collision, wearing the right colour in terms of high visibility clothing, but also elements such as learning how to use a defibrillator, for example. Next, thinking about some of the general course effectiveness. Again, the general effectiveness was perceived to be very high, and you can see the specific scores against specific statements there that we asked about the impact on participants themselves after attending. Overall, respondents felt that the course was of a very high quality in terms of delivery, with it being a very high standard, with 90% rating the course delivery as excellent. Thinking about the perceived effectiveness generally across the competencies, there is a very high level of effectiveness, and at first glance, it may be easy to kind of, perhaps dismiss these to an extent and say, well, these are simply the effect of, the positivity in the room and the fact that, people are more likely, generally we know, more likely to be positive when they're filling out these, when they're involved in evaluation studies immediately after. But the fact that through this evaluation, we have a significant amount of free text responses, and the fact that the post survey was filled out a considerable amount of time after attendance, I think we can be fairly confident of some of the really positive effects that came out of the evaluation, therefore, in terms of some of the design parameters that we placed within the evaluation early on. Firstly, with the post survey, whilst I mentioned at the start, we chose to incorporate many different questions in the pre and post survey, but to measure overall effectiveness and impact on people's self-reported behaviour after attending Biker we did have a number of statements around self-reported changes in knowledge, confidence, and intentions to apply learnings within both surveys, naturally, to assess changes in those scores. And so reflecting on the statements there, you can see that for each of the core modules, scene management, first aid, and conspicuity, we split out each of the skills, we split out each of the competencies, so knowledge, confidence, and intentions, and we measured changes pre versus post. Levels of self-reported knowledge and confidence to manage the scene of a collision involving a fellow motorcyclist increased notably after respondents had attended Biker and 100% of respondents post-survey said that they themselves would take steps to manage the scene of a collision should they find themselves in that situation, which was really positive. With first aid there, as stated, this is one of the primary reasons as to why people said that they booked themselves on a Biker course. But notably here, whilst intentions were already moderately high pre-survey, this was less so with knowledge and indeed much less so with self-visibility. And so if we move to conspicuity or self-visibility there, you can see that whilst knowledge and confidence increased moderately, with almost everyone saying that they had a good level of knowledge post-survey in terms of what to do to make themselves more visible, we did find that there was a small but persistent proportion of respondents who did not agree that they needed to do more to make themselves more visible whilst out riding. And I know that's something that we're planning to pick up in the Q&A panel towards the end of this session. But again, so overall, the quantitative changes were really positive. But what this evaluation also allowed us to do, and this is one of the primary motivations also for the commissioning of this research, was to delve into not just the positives, but also some of the slightly more negatives aspects, and also where Biker might be improved as well. And we got some really good insights from respondents about that as well. And again, that was very much about, and again, this very much has helped the project team, and it should support Biker delivery more broadly to grapple with what the course looks like moving forward. Again, as part of a kind of positive culture of using evaluation to assess the positives, but also where people envisage improvements to such interventions. Very briefly, as I mentioned at the start, we did some stats testing on the results as well. And as you can see on the screen there, all but one of those 9 statements related to the core modules and knowledge, skill, and knowledge, confidence, and intentions. All of them had a statistically significant effect, which meant that we can, with greater probability, say that self-reported changes were the result of the intervention and were not by chance. As I mentioned before, the only statement where there wasn't a statistically significant effect was with the statement that I don't need to make myself more visible to other road users whilst out riding. But as I say, the rest of them were statistically significant. So that's a brief summary of the quantitative results. Now I'd quite like to have a bit of a reflection before we move on to talk about delivery and implications, to talk about some of the really extensive free text answers that we got from participants about their experience with Biker some of the key learnings post-attendance were very much centered around feelings of being able to better control and manage the scene of a collision involving motorcyclists. And there was, which was great to see, there was real notable recognition actually in a handful of responses about helmet removal techniques and techniques to and when it's correct to do so, and how to do and how and why to do how to do so properly, and why this is important. And again, tackling some of the myths around helmet wearing, helmet removal as well, was something that clearly this intervention has had an effect on for those people who have taken part in the Southwest. So just picking up a couple of quotes on the screen there. Someone said that it is okay to remove a helmet, and Biker Down demonstrated to me how to do it safely. Someone else clearly stated that post attendance, in terms of key learnings, that visibility, for example, that I now feel that pink is more noticeable than yellow, and that I now know how to be more assertive and control the sequence of events, and to have that disposition of offering assistance where necessary. So as I say, there were lots of kind of quite lengthy post attendance statements made, which was great to see. So again, those are just some of the key learnings post attendance. In terms of some additional thoughts and suggested improvements, there was lots of praise from participants for the quality of delivery, as mentioned earlier, but also the content and the practitioners involved, and the delivery by fire service and paramedic trainers. In terms of some of the suggested improvements that were made by respondents in the Southwest, some of these were around potentially having more time on the first aid and the self-visibility elements, covering things like increased course length, yeah, and also kind of more course promotion as well. A handful of respondents stated that they'd heard about Biker Down primarily through friends and family as well. So despite the lots of post learnings, there were some suggested improvements about increasing potentially the length of the course and the amount of content offered on first aid and self-visibility. And just picking up again some of those additional thoughts. So someone said that the course was pitched perfectly at the audience, and the friendly way the instructors dealt with participants made them more willing to engage in the practical lessons in particular, which is great to see. And as I mentioned there, someone stated that they found specifically the combination of having a paramedic and a fire service giving their knowledge on the subject very beneficial. So the last bit of qualitative or free text points that I'd quite like to just dwell on. So thinking about actions, so actions that attendees reported post attendance if they were to find themselves in this situation. This is very much summarised by the fact that attendees reported that if they were to find themselves in this situation, that keeping themselves safe whilst managing the scene and considering situational factors was something that they would do. And there was notable mention more broadly about motorcyclists being more likely to be conscious of their road position and being able to intervene to carry out CPR where appropriate. And again, just picking up on some of the free text comments there. Someone said that I will be considering my riding, especially road positioning and specifically equipment choices, in more detail. And they also said that I would like to do more first aid training and indeed advanced rider training. So actually really positive to see that this is prompting people to think about other post-licensing and training courses as well, which is something that the national strategy is of course very keen on. In terms of adverse impacts that were reported, this was very much the minority, and that we had just a couple of responses stating that there remained a level of nervousness and uncertainty on equipment choices. However, some of these same participants also said that these courses nevertheless arm you with the confidence and knowledge to help when needed and also raise awareness about your own riding. So as I say, even amongst those respondents who still might have felt a little bit uncertain, they still reported behaviour change impacts post-attendance, which is really good to see. And I'm hoping that kind of you're getting a feel for, I think, just how much participants in the post-survey gave more structured and comprehensive answers about what they'd learnt in comparison to the pre-survey, which again was really, really nice to see. In addition to the quantitative and qualitative parameters of the evaluation, we also sought to collect the postcodes of those who attended, and this is very much to help us and the project team to get a better idea of the types of people who have been attending Down over the past 2 years. And it's important to say that the postcode analysis, no individual postcodes were exposed, and they were purely used in terms of this aggregated analysis to understand more about the types of people who were attending and where they were from, etc., based upon their reported home location. So we can see that from the screen there, that over half of respondents had a reported home postcode in Devon, Somerset and Cornwall, looking at the home local authority area, whilst almost half of them lived in Devon. But noticeably, there were some respondents who had attended biker down courses from slightly further afield. So also further afield in terms of places such as Gloucestershire and Wiltshire. So yeah, we can clearly see that whilst overall respondents were far more likely to come from the local area, there was a small level of import as well in terms of people attending from those other areas. We also briefly looked at the relative deprivation level. I won't get into the technical detail of the index of deprivation right now. The information that the full description you'll find in the final evaluation report. But I do think it's interesting to dwell on the fact that generally we were able to match over 90% of the postcodes provided from the survey analysis. And what this showed was that biker down respondents who attended over the past couple of years were generally from the lesser deprived backgrounds, although this isn't universal. And they were generally from lesser deprived backgrounds when comparing to southwest motorcycle casualties overall within the southwest region over the last 5 years as well. So you can see on the screen there, the light blue bar just basically shows. So you're looking for the deciles 1 to 5 are those from the lesser deprived backgrounds, and kind of 5 to 10, 6 to 10, sorry, are those from the more deprived. And as you can see that there's a clear kind of comparison there. You can see in terms of the light blue bar, which represents biker down respondents, and them generally coming slightly more so from the less deprived backgrounds there. You'll be able to find the full information on deprivation in the evaluation report. But also what we also did was to do something, we conducted some socio-demographic analysis based upon the dominant behavioural and socio-demographic factors based upon reported postcode. And we effectively used something called the ACORN dataset from Kharki. Don't worry about the specifics for now, but basically this enabled us to think about more generally the types of people who, or effectively the ideal type of the types of people who had attended biker down courses over the past couple of years. And as we can see, just picking up a couple of the descriptions, which you'll find in the full report, it was generally people such as older couples who are coming up to retirement, empty nesters living in comfortable detached properties, and also kind of those who are home-owning families and couples with above average incomes, for example. So, and again, those are, you can see some of the specific ACORN groups that we pin down and some of the proportions there in the left-hand column. But again, we would very much encourage people to go to the full research report if you're interested in learning a bit more about the types of people who were attended. Lastly, I'd just like to go through a bit of a brief summary of the evaluation results today. I very much appreciate this has been a bit of an overview, and again would warmly encourage you to go through the full report if you're interested. So the evaluation of Biker Down in Devon and Cornwall over the last 2 years has had an overall very positive impact on attendees in terms of their self-reported knowledge, confidence, and their intentions to apply learnings should they find themselves at the scene of a collision involving a fellow motorcyclist whilst out riding. These changes in the pre versus post survey were confirmed by the stats testing that we did for all but one of the statements. And as I mentioned earlier, it was only for intentions around self-visibility that the changes were slightly less pronounced, with a small but persistent number of respondents feeling that they didn't need to do anything to make themselves more visible. Generally, the course was very well received, and the evaluation has found that overall the delivery of Biker Down was very, very strong, and there was a tangible appreciation for the quality of delivery and the authority that came with the fire service and the paramedic trainee input into the courses there. There is some scope to consider improvements to the Biker Down course based upon some of the free text insights that were given by attendees. So, for example, there was a desire for more content, potentially around first aid and self-visibility, with a very small minority of respondents stating that they still had a level of nervousness and uncertainty about what to do should they find themselves in this specific situation. Generally, thinking about the types of people who have attended, attendees over the past 2 years have generally been older males, aged 45 and above, and in particular those who, having returned from a break in motorcycling for a number of years, are nonetheless highly experienced and very much see Biker Down as a valuable refresher and as part of uptake for other courses as well. Many respondents mentioned that they were considering other post-license courses in addition to Biker Down, which was really good to see. The supplementary analysis that I briefly touched upon towards the end there confirmed the kind of the demographic profile of those who have been in attendance, and it may be beneficial to think about those who are not in attendance and who it may also be beneficial to increase outreach to more broadly moving forwards. So that's an overview of the Biker Down evaluation in terms of the methods and the results that we used over the last 2 years in Devon and Cornwall, and a huge thanks to the project team for their involvement in this. And what I'd like to do now is kind of open up the floor to the project team. If anyone would like to kind of pick up anything in terms of the results or kind of the experience from your delivery on the ground. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Tony.
Hi, thank you. Thanks everybody for coming in. Can I, before we start with do anything else, can I offer my personal thanks to Jim Sanderson, who sat in there today. Jim, without you, none of this would happen, mate. And I think it's only just right that you get the true recognition of what you did so many years ago. I'd also like to put a quick call out to Kevin Williams, who was the person who devised the original Sights Are Being Seen all that time ago, and is mainly the basis of where we go. There's a lot of chat in the chat about visibility, conspicuity. And one of the things that Andy and I found, we weren't actually involved in the question setting. That was done by people in Vision Zero Southwest and the management team, if you like. So I think you need to be a little bit careful of what you ask for in the questions, because it has skewed it slightly. And what we do is we do an awful lot about not relying on high-vis. High-vis is not the be-all and end-all. We talk about back in the 80s with when the government looked at all the collisions, and it was talked about having your headlights on and wearing high vis or wearing a bright clothing, and nothing's happened since. We still have the same amount of collisions, certainly with cars in and around junctions. So we certainly go and head towards not being relying on that. We talk about how the eyes work, how the brain operates, and the connection between the two, and the fact that movement is far more important than wearing bright clothing. And on a personal note, I saw somebody talked about rural and urban areas in the chat. Yellow's or it's really very bright green, really, but that doesn't really work in the rural environment. And Devon and Somerset, we've got quite a lot of that. So depending on what time of year it is, then often if it's a really high contrast, bright sunny day, darker clothing may be more beneficial. So what I wouldn't want to do is anybody that reads the report think that we champion the use of high-vis clothing and headlights all the time. We do far more than that. It's just that the way the questions were set on the post survey, it sort of led us down that route a little bit. That said, we talk and we try to encourage people. You talk about one of the other things that came up was about the age demographics, and I think it is all about the right people who are prepared to step forward and help at the scene. And it's all about that person wanting to do that. And some of our younger people, and we have had young people from 16, 17-year-olds, they mostly come with parents that are doing it as well. I'm not convinced if they're on their own, they'd have enough self-confidence and belief to step forward and do that at the risk of being challenged by older people. And because of that, we've introduced something called Streetwise, which we go out into colleges and we do a much shorter program. It's not based on biking down particularly. It's what we're trying to do is trying to keep young riders alive in their first couple of years. So particularly those that are having low speed collisions in urban environments. The problem with it is we talk about movement, lateral movement to be seen and positioning. I see Jim's put up. But the problem with that is if you teach somebody that's just on a CVT, when they come to do their mod 1, mod 2, they'll fail it if they start moving around too much on the road. So it's a very difficult situation to try and deal with about trying to teach people how to position themselves and then get failed by an examiner.
Yeah, definitely.
That's sort of my bit for that. Unless there's any questions later, I'll let Andy do the post-crash care bit now. But thank you all.
Yeah, before we move on, thanks Tony for your thoughts there. Really insightful, and thanks for the clarifications on the kind of the self-visibility aspect of that as well. I think that the analysis clearly raises some important questions about who biking down is currently reaching in the Southwest, and indeed who it needs to reach. Because as you say, there's kind of when you've got a post-test licensing course, again, I think something you touched upon there about the fact that being really careful about what we encourage and what we don't encourage based upon where people are in the licensing process, young versus older riders. But also something that came out of the analysis for me was the fact that with a post-collision response intervention such as this, it very much seems to the fact that the benefits of even a cohort of motorcyclists attending benefits regional motorcyclists more generally just by proxy. By proxy of kind of sharing the road space with them and traveling on the same networks, that has a positive effect as well. So that does beg the question of, does the intervention need to reach everyone, or is this about reaching the right person? But I know that's very much an open question there. So yeah, Andy, I'm happy to bring you in. Did you have any thoughts on reflections on delivery and what we've said?
I think it's fair to say that Module 2 is very popular. The post-crash care element has developed since we began all those years ago. And I don't know if all biker down groups do, but we certainly encourage the defibrillator use now and train that as well as part of the engagement, which looking at some of the feedback, to extend that post-crash care element, that's a slight problem for me in terms of time. How do we fit that into an already busy morning? And in Devon and Somerset, we basically do a 4-hour workshop because we give them half an hour, try and take some pressure off the break time, etc. And even then, depending on the group you've got with you, they seem to, once they get confidence in what they're doing, they want to learn more, and that's a really good thing. But I guess or my focus is to keep it simple. Try not to get them too bedded down in the what ifs and the whys and the wherefores, but actually say, look, if you're going to save a life, you need to get on and deliver this really quickly. And I put in the chat, we've got recorded 2 people that are now living on the earth because of what people did on a biker down workshop. And I guess that's what Jim's whole purpose was all those years ago. And like Tony, I'm as passionate about it as I was when we started 10 years ago. In terms of helmet removal, there's very little evidence clinically about taking a helmet off, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. A lot of urban myths that have been created over the years,
Yep.
But very little research. And we're working with Tim Nutbean at the moment to look at, could we get together and produce something clinically, research-wise, to look at helmet removal in a more clinical way, so it could actually back up what we're trying to deliver. And that's very much in the pot as we speak.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Andy. And I think that very much connects, doesn't it, to, and I mentioned the work of Impact towards the start there, and the great work that's happening in that space, and your involvement with that. And I know that the Road Injury Priority Setting Partnership is directly dealing with these research questions of how do we best teach and support bystanders in terms of their capability to assist, and indeed how to do that safely and when it's appropriate, when it's not appropriate, etc. And I think that interventions such as Biker Down and this evaluation are directly feeding into those conversations. So yeah,
I've just seen in the chat Jim has put the defib training is included quite widely, which is good to see. And I would go back to what Tony mentioned earlier on, in that some of the stuff we teach is very basic stuff about, if you just protect the casualty, protect the scene and call for help, that's 90% of the work done. And as a fire and rescue service, and in my former life as a paramedic, getting to a scene that's safe and secure and a casualty is reassured is a big improvement to what you get if you don't. It makes a huge difference for patient outcome at the end. So module 2 is good. Somebody was talking about demographics and younger people and older people. I think it's fair to say that a lot of people that come on Biker Down are very much on board with Biker Down. We do have younger people. I think younger people struggle in a very experienced group of older people in terms of how they put themselves forward. That's a natural thing. And I know I'm going to let Tony talk about Streetwise a bit, because that's a thing that I think would really improve younger people getting on board with biker safety, in my view. What's your thoughts on that, Tone?
Yeah, I mean, what I'd like to do is, I don't want to make Streetwise this event, but Streetwise is very much, like I've already said, about trying to keep young riders alive in the first couple of years, where they transition through the CBT up to taking their mod 1 or 2 or stop riding. We don't cover too much around first aid. It's more about why they are more at risk than other people, what are the particular issues for them, talk about PPE, and I don't mean IVs, I mean about what they wear, which is normally tracky bottoms and a puffer jacket and a helmet because they have to. And we talk about some of the bits and pieces around that. I don't really want to labour that. If anybody wants to find out about Streetwise, I've put my email address already up on the chat, but it's ahayward@dsfire.gov.uk.
Okay.
Or you can just email Biker Down at Devon and Somerset, dsfire.gov.uk. We've got a email address there. I don't want to hold too much. We've got 10 minutes left, and I'm sure that some people may want to ask things.
So in terms of, I was going to jump in there on, I know I spoke about some of the suggested improvements to Bike It Down and kind of the small minority of people who, there was a level of kind of nervousness or uncertainty about things like PPE or things like equipment choice. And I think that we know that so for example, some of the work that the National Young Rider Forum has done about understanding those within the younger age cohort, that there is a bit of a kind of, distinction between those younger riders who, are quite proud of their PPE, can name accredited suppliers, know where to get effective and accredited gear from, versus those who, remain quite uncertain about what is the best gear, and what what gear can support me to be safe whilst I'm out riding. Has there been anything in terms of the delivery on the ground that you'd say that you'd highlight in that instance that has kind of come out there? Or
I think, sorry, I'm alive.
No,
I was just going to say, I think if you look at the post-crash care element, sometimes, depending on the group that's coming, some of them may have done first aid at work courses, etc. The problem with those first aid at work courses, they're delivered in quite a formal way, and they don't let you expand outside the boundaries of that delivery a little bit. And we're talking about doing the best you can. So obviously we live in a grey area in the fire and rescue service. There are definite do's, definite don'ts, but there's a lot of grey in the middle. And I think that's where Bike It Down sits really in what we're trying to deliver. So I think sometimes when you start giving people a little bit of knowledge, they start to maybe worry a bit about doing the wrong thing, because everyone worries more about doing the wrong thing than the right thing.
yeah,
And what we try to do is promote that. Look, if you just hold their hand and tell them they'll be okay, that's a massive improvement to where they were only 5 minutes before. So it's the small things that make big differences to casualties, not necessarily, it's all the Gucci stuff is great, but ideally people want to be cared for. And if you just do that basic element, that's the way forward. But I think some people, because we're delivering quite a lot of information in a short space of time, they can get too concerned about the what ifs. I think we try to leave that as much as we can, but ultimately you're always going to have those people that maybe want to research a bit more or learn a bit more. I don't know. Tony, do you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right. I think one of the key messages that Jim always put down, I think, is that you'll do the best you can. Obviously, what we want to try and do is not harm anybody. And we always tell people at the end that there's always the Sarah Act to protect them, because people are afraid of legislation, the fact that they'll do something wrong and get legislated over it, or get taken to court. So we always try and talk about the Sarah Act, and we make reference to it. We put it on the screen and we hand out, because it's only a page of legislation, just to try and relieve somebody that as long as they don't do anything that we haven't taught them really, or they don't do anything outside the box, they can only benefit people really. And as Andy said, talking to somebody, making people aware that they're not on their own is so beneficial.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what I would bring in there as well is this kind of principle of, not just of this Bike It Down evaluation, but of road safety evaluations more broadly, which is that, intervention should really aim to kind of do no harm. And I think that obviously with an intervention such as Bike It Down, which is, very much grounded in the, the post-collision response space, as was spoken about to an extent, it's, as you say, there's a tension, isn't there, between getting people to kind of, increase their, as I say, knowledge, confidence, and intentions to intervene in what is undoubtedly, a very traumatic situation, should they find themselves in that situation, and doing so in a way that doesn't necessarily make them feel scared or nervous, and that kind of that our educational programs are such that don't lead to unintended harm. And as you say, I think what you said, Andy, about the whole sort of, that we make sure that, that we don't focus on the what ifs as such, and focus on what you can do in that positive, empowering message that supports motorcyclists in the round across the core competencies that are assessed. So there is a bit of a tension there, isn't there, with an intervention like this, and managing that carefully is something that hopefully this evaluation has kind of helped us to focus on and inform delivery moving forwards. Both Andys, was that, before we kind of wrap this up, was there anything else that you wanted to pick up, or Annabelle conversely?
I just wanted to pick up that there's another side and element to Bike It Down, which I think is often overlooked, and that's how our communities come into fire stations. They drive past them every day, never realizing what we deliver or how we work. And I think bringing them into your fire stations, whether they're community ones or otherwise, we've got a massive positivity out of that. And actually, one of the things we tack on to our Biker Down at headquarters is after the session's finished, we invite them into the fire control so they can actually have a look around. Fire control are really on board with it because they rarely get any visitors there on a good day. So to have ordinary members of the public come in and see what effectively they're paying for with their council tax, but actually to see they get a better understanding what their firefighters are doing across the county. And I think that's a real bonus for me on the side of what we deliver as a workshop.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Great stuff. So yeah, I appreciate there's been a lot of information today. Yeah, but so I've really enjoyed going through the evaluation results for Bike It Down in Devon and Cornwall. And so I'd just like to kind of start to wrap this up by kind of saying, obviously, thank you to the Vision Zero Southwest Partnership for commissioning the evaluation, and a huge thank you to Devon and Somerset Fire and Rescue Service and yourself on the project team, both Andys, and indeed Cornwall Council as well. And as I mentioned at the start, yeah, this is very much a space that's continues to attract a lot of positive focus from obviously where this all started, back in Kent as well, and the role that they're playing in supporting the sector around Biker Down delivery. And I hope that this evaluation this webinar today has been useful to not only help us grapple with the results, but think about motorcycle safety and post-collision response a little bit more as well. Yeah, and so without further ado, just like to thank everyone who has taken an hour out of their day to join us today for this Biker Down webinar. So again, huge thanks to yeah, Andy, Tony, and Annabelle Priest, and the wider project team. And lastly, just to thank everyone for joining today and as part of this RSGB webinar series. And lastly, this is the last RSGB Analyst Network series webinar before joining the DOTS next week. So the team are very much looking forward to seeing some of you there, should you be in attendance, and more broadly, just looking forward to keeping the conversation going, really, and to be involved in work like this. So yeah, thank you, everyone, and I will give you 2 minutes of your days back. Thank you very much, all.